that's proving difficult. And as we saw only last week, the president of Tunisia launched a very strong attack on migrants in Tunisia, which was then condemned for its targeting of African migrants by the head of the African Union.
Andrew, this wreckage at sea, 100 people, maybe more dead. As you said, it's a kind of tragedy we've seen time and again over the past decade or so. Ultimately, what has to change to prevent it?
Well, that's the most difficult question, because the issue that European governments are very reluctant to address is the provision of what's sometimes called kind of safe and legal pathways. So the argument that's made is that if you want to reduce some of this pressure for irregular migration, then actually pathways need to be open that allow people to travel safely towards Europe. Now, this is very controversial in European politics, the idea that you do allow some facilitated migration. So this is really the crux of it. Tough border controls will likely lead to these kind of tragedies, but an approach which allows some facilitated migration is likely to be politically controversial, and it's not the kind of approach that prime ministers like Giorgia Meloni were elected on.
Andrew Geddes is director of the Migration Policy Center. He joined us from Florence, Italy. Thank you very much for your time, Andrew.
Thank you.
Underpinning so much of what you do these days is this sound. That is the incessant hum of a server farm, tens of thousands of computers all stacked row upon row in massive warehouses. The server farm noise comes from electric fans dissipating the heat produced by the electronic components. Cloud computing companies like Amazon have built data centers like this around the globe, handling everything from your request to the fastest route home, to document storage, to serving up podcasts. You could call the servers the beating heart of the internet, all sharing one big problem: what to do with all the heat they generate.
If you've ever had a laptop on your lap, you know what that heat is.
John O'Shea leads the Heat and Electricity Division at Codema, the energy agency for the city of Dublin, and has a plan for using all that heat from the Amazon servers.
What we have is essentially a coil in that air handling unit that absorbs the heat from the air. So that goes into water in this coil, and then that's pumped to our energy center.
Warm water from the server farm is piped into a nearby energy center run by the city.
When the warm water hits the heat pumps, then so the heat pumps essentially work like your refrigerator in reverse,
turning out very hot water that's piped into nearby buildings.
The first buildings to connect are essentially a kind of a university campus.
The 5,000 students at Technological University Dublin returned from holiday break last month to buildings heated entirely by waste heat from Amazon.
You just walk into the buildings and you feel the same heat that you always have, so you just know that it's low carbon and you're using essentially a heat source that was, otherwise going to be dumped into the atmosphere.
O'Shea has more plans for Dublin, like using heat wasted by supermarket refrigeration units and by the city's solid waste incinerator.
That heat is currently being dumped into Dublin Bay, currently heating the fish, so we want to basically attach it to a district heating network so it can heat the people instead.
O'Shea says the system took just a few months to get up and running. The benefits came right away. Amazon saves money by using less air conditioning to cool its servers. Dublin saves on its heating bills.
But also, in general, just trying to save the world from climate change.
John O'Shea, who leads the Heat and Electricity Division at Dublin's energy agency, Codema, ending our show today on a warm note. The World comes to you from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. I'm Marco Werman. Be safe, stay strong. We'll see you again.
The World is supported by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people. From the philanthropic foundation Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and the advancement of international peace and security at Carnegie.org. By the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. MacFound.org. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Betsy Gardella and Jim Smith, Jeannie and Henry Beckton, Richard Gingras, Paul G. Haga Jr., and the Ken and Lucy Lehman family. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.
People are fucking stupid.
Good afternoon, and thank you for listening to The World. Tune in to the next edition of The World tomorrow afternoon at 3. Up next are news headlines along with All Things Considered. I'm Mike Szymanski, and this is 90.7 WFAE Charlotte, 90.3 WFHE Hickory, and WFAE.org, Charlotte's NPR news source. Support today comes from our listeners and Providence Day School, offering 100 summer academic, specialty, and sports programs, plus Camp Spirit, a traditional day camp developed by Providence Day faculty. More information at www.providenceday.org/summer. All Things Considered is next. It's 4 o'clock.
There is not a consensus right now in the U.S. government about exactly how COVID started.
The White House won't draw a definitive conclusion following a low-confidence assessment that the COVID-19 pandemic originated in a Chinese lab.
It's Monday, February 27th, and this is All Things Considered from NPR News.
I'm Elsa Chang.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. The continuing drought in the Southwest could threaten the rapid growth in Phoenix, Arizona.
We have to get a handle on the true gravity of this drought. You know, to build when you don't have water just doesn't make sense.
Also, the UK and the European Union have signed an agreement on trade in and out of Northern Ireland.
And meet a research team that flies through snowstorms to solve some mysteries about snowfall.
We need to know that whole range to understand all the structures that are in storms, what's common, what's not common.
Those stories and more after these news headlines.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says she will ramp up efforts to prevent Russians from evading U.S. sanctions as the war in Ukraine extends into a second year. From Kyiv, NPR's Yulian Haidar reports that Yellen stopped in the Ukrainian capital on her way home from a turbulent G20 meeting in India.
During a visit to a school that had been damaged by Russian forces, Yellen said sanctions remain an important tool to counter, quote, Russia's military-industrial complex.
Our coalition of over 30 countries has mounted the swiftest, most unified, and most ambitious sanctions regime in modern history.
But huge economies like China continue to trade manufactured goods with Russia. That's one of the reasons why China refused to sign on to a statement condemning Russia's war at a G20 meeting this weekend. At the school visit, Yellen refused to answer reporters' questions asking if the U.S. would sanction China if it began to supply Russia with weapons. Yulian Haidar, NPR News, Kyiv.
The state of Florida is now in control of Walt Disney World. Today, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, who's widely expected to run for president in 2024, signed a bill that ended Disney's 50-year-long self-governing status. DeSantis and Disney publicly clashed over the theme park giant's opposition to a state law that restricts discussions of gender identity or sexual orientation in kindergarten through third grade. Outrage in Volusia County, Florida today over a recent series of anti-Semitic acts.
We are not going to tolerate this. Let me tell you, this is not about free speech. This is about violence.
Volusia County Sheriff Mike Schitt was speaking out after a meeting with faith-based and community leaders today. A hate group reportedly used a portable projector to display anti-Semitic messages on the side of the Daytona International Speedway, held up anti-Semitic signs on a local pedestrian overpass, and handed out anti-Semitic propaganda in Ormond Beach. Last month, Florida lawmakers introduced a bill to make certain anti-Semitic acts hate crimes and classify certain offenses as felonies. Fallout continues after the creator of the Dilbert comic strip, Scott Adams, made a series of racist remarks last week. NPR's Anastasia Siulkas reports the comics distributor, Andrews McMeel Universal, is severing ties.
During a live stream on YouTube, Adams called black people a, quote, hate group and encouraged white people to, quote, get the hell away from black people. Major newspapers, including the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times, had already announced they would no longer carry Dilbert, which premiered in 1989. Before Andrews McMeel Universal canceled the strip's distribution, Dilbert appeared in 65 countries and 25 languages. Adams had long been criticized for other comments, including questioning the number of people who died in the Holocaust and claiming that a television version of Dilbert was canceled because he's white.
This is NPR News.
This is WFAE News. I'm Gwendolyn Glenn. The North Carolina Child Fatality Task Force delivered their 2023 annual report to the North Carolina General Assembly today with grim findings about child deaths from nearly all causes. The report recommended programs to improve firearm storage safety, in particular to prevent deaths. The report found that firearm death rates for children under 18 more than doubled from 2019 through 2021. Over a longer time frame, the state has seen an even bigger increase in youth firearm deaths, which jumped 231% in the last 10 years. In 2021, suicide rates from ages 10 to 17 hit a 2-decade high. The youth suicide rate of 5.7% per 100,000 is more than double what it was 2 decades ago. A recent survey showed 22% of North Carolina high school students have considered suicide, and the state's infant mortality rate remains nearly unchanged in North Carolina over the past 5 years. Last year, it stood at 6.8 deaths per 1,000 live births. Black infants remain twice as likely to die in North Carolina as white infants. You can find a link to the full report and recommendations at WFAE.org. The judge has ruled that jurors in Alex Murdaugh's double murder trial will get to visit the South Carolina home where the killings took place before they begin deliberating. 54-year-old Murdaugh is accused of murdering his wife and son at their home. His lawyers asked for the trip to the property so that the jury can see the dog kennels near where the body of 52-year-old Maggie Murdaugh was found, and the storage room where 22-year-old Paul Murdaugh was killed on June 7, 2021. The judge made his ruling today to allow the visit but did not immediately set a date for it. Defense attorney Dick Harpootlian had said today that it's important for jurors to visit the Murdaugh home to see how small the feed room is and where it is compared to Maggie's body. Prosecutors said they didn't want the jury to visit because it has been 20 months since the killings and it looks different. This is WFAE News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation.
Calling Susan Mancino as Global Mobile.